Which is better, the longsword
or the katana?
A debate that's been raging on the internet since
the internet was invented, I think?
Probably. Yeah. But today we are gonna solve this issue once and for all with science.
And by science, he means hitting each other with swords really hard.
Yeah, isn't that what I said?
Science, yeah.
Yeah, science. Let's get started.
Good one. Yeah, double though.
Well, that proves it.
The longsword's better.
Wait, we're just trolling.
There's a lot more context to talk about with this debate.
So let's start this video again for real. There are different versions of the longsword.
Just like there were different versions of the katana.
The matchup that we just showed you wasn't fair. We were using one of the longest versions of the longsword against one of the shorter versions of the katana.
The katana we just showed you was first and foremost an everyday carry. It was designed to be easy to carry around and short enough to draw as fast as possible.
Versus this longsword that we used to fight against it, which is a later period longsword, either used for dueling or for use in the effectual when longsword had become more of a sport. So it's not really a good matchup.
A better comparison rather than the longsword would be something like the messer.
This is a messer. It's a convenient everyday carry sword. It's just about as long as the katana is, and it was designed to be easily worn on the hip and easily drawn. These two would be a much better match for each other in terms of construction and use case.
If the longsword went against this messer, we'd have the same result.
In fact, we've done this experiment before and the longsword destroyed the messer. But luckily,
we thought of that.
This is an O katana. It was specifically designed to be used either on foot on the battlefield
or for 1v1 duels.
You can see these two are the exact same length, which means it should put them on an equal playing field. So let's see what happens.
See, you can actually reach my hands.
I started off with the O katana, and one of the things I found was my cut around game was alright, but I was getting hit with a lot of afterblows. The katana is balanced differently than the longsword, and I was having a hard time being able to do the cuts I'm used to and getting it back in place for the parry. Because the longsword is double-edged, it was a lot easier to do little snap cuts from underneath and harass from both sides, effectively making the longsword feel like it was faster.
Yeah, but no, the afterblow is only because I wouldn't run through. Yeah.
Oh my god, okay.
Yeah.
Because of its construction, the longsword also has a much more effective thrust. It's easier to go straight forward and to lock your opponent out. The katana wasn't quite as adept at thrusting.
Honestly, we were a bit shocked by this result.
We figured that with equal length, these would perform about the same, because at the end of the day, they were very similar objects used in very similar ways.
They're both two-handed cut and thrust weapons, and a lot of the techniques are similar between them. In fact, there have been many people who study both who have said how similar these are.
There were a couple things that we expected and a couple of things that surprised us.
We thought that the crossguard was going to play a bigger role in determining which one was better or worse, because the crossguard on the longsword protects the hands a bit better than the tsuba on the katana, although they did make bigger tsuba.
But we found that when we had two swords of a similar length, the hand shots were about equal. The katana wasn't exceptionally more exposed in the hands.
Something that we did expect and did turn out to be true was the longsword had a few more options. Because it has two edges, it was able to harass from both sides, which did come in handy quite a few times.
We also expected that the longsword to be better at thrusting, and this was also true. There is the argument that the katana is a little bit more efficient at cutting, so if they did hit, cuts with the katana would be more dangerous or debilitating than cuts with the longsword.
But in reality, this doesn't really matter a whole lot. If the longsword or the katana cut you without wearing armor, you're probably not going to be able to continue the fight. We weren't counting incidental contact, it was only good quality cuts. So it doesn't matter if it cut all the way to the bone or just cut through most of the muscle, you're not using that arm anymore. Just to make sure there wasn't some hole in our testing, we also did katana versus katana and O katana versus O katana, and we also swapped who had what weapon when we were doing the versus test. And the results were pretty similar overall. When the weapons were paired against each other, we were both about the same. Clark came out a little bit ahead because he's a little bit better with two-handed sword swords than I am. And then when it was longsword versus katana, even though Clark is better at two-handed swords than I am, I still came out on top when I had the longsword. There's one last caveat to talk about, and that's the fact that neither of us are trained with any form of the katana.
We both do a lot of sword-based martial arts with a variety of different swords, but they're all generally with European swords, not Japanese swords.
These swords are very alike, and there's a lot of crossover. If you know how to use one, you'll be pretty proficient at the other one. The question is, how much of a difference does that specific experience make?
Especially at the highest levels of skill.
Look, if we're honest, we were genuinely shocked by this outcome.
We thought that if the longsword and the katana was of equal length, they really would be even.
So we thought maybe we're missing something.
That's why this is only part 1 of this series.
So next, we're gonna go train against somebody who has a ton of experience, both training and sparring with different versions of the katana.
And we're gonna see if adding in a trained Japanese martial artist will change anything.
So we went to go see our friend Rusty, who has a lot of experience with Japanese swordsmanship. We made a couple of changes for this test. First, we swapped out the katana we were using. The one that we have is nice and flexible, which makes it great for thrusting with friends, but not so good at doing some of the techniques for Japanese swordsmanship. We got a stiffer one that Rusty wanted to use. The second thing is, to match the length of our shorter katana, we also are using shorter long swords. In Rusty's hands, the katana was much more effective. We weren't hitting the same things that we normally were. He had a much more forward guard position, and it just wasn't the same as when we were fighting each other. Now don't get us wrong, it's not like the katana totally destroyed the longsword or anything. Basically, this made the matchup pretty even. We also decided it would be a good idea to do a control experiment where we had katanas and Rusty had a longsword. We also thought it would just be kind of fun. Rusty also has extensive experience with the longsword, so this was an interesting matchup. This is where the differences became a lot more apparent. Rusty was a lot more proficient with a katana than we were, and that meant that he was kicking our butts with the longsword.
Yeah, but I didn't cover the octagon. So we had our friend Rusty here, who doesn't want to be on the internet and is a very private person. Rusty's voice is being ported in through magic, techno magic.
What's up, guys?
Yeah. So before we say anything else, we're going to talk about Rusty and his credentials.
So yeah, long story short, I'm half Japanese. I studied Kendo and Muso Shinran-ryu Iaido for about 10 years. I hold a Shodan in Kendo through the Midwest Kendo Federation. I'm unranked in Muso Shinran-ryu just because I never had the opportunity to test. David asked me to come out and just kind of give the katana a fair chance. I'd also want to caveat that I have been out of practice for about 15 years. I do HEMA a lot, and I did Olympic saber fencing. I haven't been geographically in an area where there's Kendo in about 15 years, so my skill level is not that of a current practicing Shodan. A current practicing Shodan through the Midwest or Southwest Kendo Federation would absolutely mop the floor right now. So that's just something to understand.
Even so, Rusty is a great fencer and swordsman all around. And we want to point out this experiment wasn't really to prove a conclusive point about one being better or the other. We just wanted to see if there were things that we were missing. Another caveat to say here is that Rusty has been doing two-handed swordsmanship and even longsword longer than either of us have. So the skill levels are weird. It's not a perfect thing. But we did find out that yes, there were things that we weren't accounting for, and that did lead to us giving the katana a poorer chance. I think you saw some of our sparring. What were some of the things that we were doing wrong, maybe?
So the katana doesn't use a lot of the same kind of parries and cuts that a traditional longsword does. You also hold it slightly differently, so you kind of rotate your wrists inward to kind of keep your wrists in line behind the blade, and that shuts off a lot of easy hand and wrist snipes, which you guys weren't doing. And then you use a lot of deflective beats and counter cuts into a cut, like a cut against the sword into a cut against the person. A lot more with Japanese style swordsmanship than you do in European swordsmanship. So both do both, but the Japanese, for one reason or another, lean really heavily towards deflections and counter cuts into the sword and then cutting into the opponent.
Yeah, because the biggest thing I noticed between them and when we had them swapping was with the katana. I was getting tagged a lot more on openings because of basically what you just mentioned. A lot of those openings are closed off if I were to do like a more katana-like technique with the katana.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, if you rotate your wrists inwards, almost like you're wringing out a rag, and you put them in line, your fingers are under the bottom of the tsuba now, and then your wrists are in line with the blade, so that gives you a lot more protection for that style of sword.
Interesting.
Kawak and I did a little bit of off-camera sparring with the katanas against each other, taking a bit of Rusty's advice. I managed to pull off one of those counterbeat into cut, and it was really cool. Like I said, this wasn't specifically to be like, yes, we've proved one thing or the other, because there's too many variables going on. We just wanted to see if there's something we're missing, and we found out there was. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Rusty?
I would say it's fun to talk about it. My opinion is that an okatana or tachi is about the equivalent to a longsword of the same length. It's really going to come down to the skill of the swordsman. You know, a katana versus a hand and a half sword, or a shorter Fiori length longsword. It's really going to come down to the skill of the swordsman. If you use like an Edo period kind of regimented, like really nerve by law, really short katana against a super long judicial dual longsword, the longsword's obviously going to have a huge advantage. It's really what you're comparing, and also the philosophy of a use behind a katana compared to a longsword is a little bit different.
Yeah, there were some interesting differences. And when we started this experiment, we thought that what you just said about them being equal was going to be the thing. And then when we didn't get that result, we were shocked. So we're glad we did this because it brings it back more towards that.
Yeah. It basically showed us we do need to just learn how to use the katana in order to have any sort of opinion on this.
And that is where the next thing comes, because we have started taking kendo classes. And so we are going to start a new journey, and that is to try and get some experience with Japanese swordsmanship, starting with kendo. Thanks, Rusty, for being here. Thanks for watching, and I guess get ready for some fun kendo content as we become noobs in a new martial art.
We're getting good.
Get good!
Get the blade!
Get bad first so we can get good! See you next time.
Thanks for watching the video. We hope you liked it. If you like what we do here, please consider supporting the channel for as low as $1 a month. This helps us do all sorts of stuff, including afford kendo lessons. Click the link on screen right now. You can also go to sellswordarts.com to find links for training, gear recommendations, and all sorts of other things.